He thought it was just another stranded driver, but when this old mechanic saw who he really helped, his hands started to shake. And what Jason Statham did next left him speechless. If stories like this move you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life twists that'll blow your mind. Redemption in the rain. Redemption, Nevada, wasn't built for rain. The adobe buildings drank the moisture like a dying man offered water, turning the usual dusty ochre to a deeper, muddier brown. The few paved streets reflected the gray sky, making the whole town look like a faded photograph left out in the sun. Inside Elderwood Garage, the scent of oil, grease, and old rubber hung heavy in the air, fighting a losing battle against the dampness seeping in. Pin-up calendars, yellowed and curled at the edges, adorned the walls alongside faded posters of classic cars. A vintage Coca-Cola sign buzzed faintly, its neon glow casting a weak, red light across the cluttered workbench. Hank Elderwood, a man carved from the same granite as the mountain surrounding Redemption, wiped his hands on a rag, the grease staining the wrinkles that crisscrossed his palms like a roadmap of a long life. He flipped off the overhead fluorescent lights, one by one, the silence growing with each click. The rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water from a leaky roof punctuated the stillness. He walked the perimeter, checking the locks on the roll-up doors. The metallic clang of the heavy bolts echoed in the cavernous space. He paused by the front window, peering out at the deserted main street. Not a soul braving the downpour. Just the way he liked it. One last look around. The hulking silhouette of the tow truck, the half-disassembled engine on the stand, the tools neatly arranged in their drawers. Everything in its place. A ritual. Comfort. He reached for the key, the metal cold against his calloused fingers. He turned the lock, the click, a final punctuation mark on another day. Another day closer to, well, Hank wasn't sure what, but he'd be ready for it. He always was. The black Aston. Hank was wiping down the counter, the scent of oil and WD-40 clinging to the air like a familiar cologne. Outside, the Nevada sun dipped low, painting the mesas in shades of bruised orange and purple. He was looking forward to a quiet evening, a reheated pot of chili, and maybe an old Western on the flickering television in his small apartment above the garage. Then the Aston Martin roared, or rather coughed, into his life. The vehicle was a stark contrast to the dust-caked pickups and battered sedans that usually graced his bay. Obsidian black, gleaming even under a layer of desert grit, it looked like something that had been misplaced from a Bond film. The driver remained inside, the engine wheezing like a dying beast. Hank sighed, tossed the rag onto the counter, and ambled out. He squinted, trying to make out the driver's face, but the hood and the tinted windows offered little help. "Got a problem, son?" he asked, his voice raspy from years of breathing and engine fumes. The window hummed down, revealing a sliver of shadowed face. "Engine's been sputtering," a voice smooth and low replied. "Thought I'd try my luck here. Heard you're the best this side of the Mississippi." Hank chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Heard that, have you? Well, let's have a look-see, then." He circled the car, his experienced eyes scanning for obvious faults. "Sounds like she's choking on something." Pop the hood. Under the hood, Hank circled the Aston Martin like a wary dog, the Nevada twilight painting long shadows across the dusty concrete. He popped the hood with a practiced flick of his wrist. The engine, a snarling beast of chrome and rubber, was a far cry from the tractors and pickups he usually patched up. A thin plume of steam still hissed from somewhere deep within its bowels. "Leaking like a sieve," Hank muttered, his breath misting in the cooling air. He ran a calloused finger along a brittle, cracked hose. Coolant hose, upper radiator. Seen it 1,000 times. The driver leaned against the fender, arms crossed. "Think you can fix it?" A voice, low and laced with a weariness that mirrored Hank's own. "Fix anything," Hank grunted, already reaching for his toolbox. His hands, gnarled and stained with oil, moved with surprising dexterity. He wrestled with the rusted clamp, muttering under his breath about cheap parts and planned obsolescence. "Been fixin' things since before you were born, son." I appreciate that, the driver said, pushing off the fender and stepping closer. Out here in the middle of nowhere, it's good to know someone still knows how to use their hands. Hank glanced up, a question in his eyes. Passing through. Yeah, the driver said, looking out towards the desolate horizon. Just passing through. A pregnant pause hung in the air, heavy with unspoken stories. Hank tightened the new clamp, the metallic snick echoing in the stillness. Stories in the static. Martha always said I had a voice for radio. Hank chuckled, tightening a bolt. Said I should call into those late-night shows, spin a yarn. She loved my stories, even the ones she'd heard 100 times. He wiped grease from his hands with a rag, a wistful look in his eyes. Like the time I tried to train a squirrel to fetch bottle caps. Martha nearly choked laughing when it buried one in her prize-winning rosebush. The driver leaned against the fender, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. My granddad used to tell me stories about growing up in London during the Blitz. Said the static on the radio sounded like voices, like lost souls trying to reach out. Used to scare me half to death. He paused, the smile fading. Now I just wish I'd listened closer. The bell above the garage door jingled, pulling Hank from his reverie. B. Rodriguez, sunshine personified in a bright yellow dress, bounced in, holding a paper bag. Lunchtime, Hank. I brought your favorite chili cheese fries. B, you shouldn't have, Hank said, his gruffness softened by her presence. He nodded towards the driver, who was now fiddling with his phone. Got a customer here. Famous one, turns out. B.A.'s eyes widened slightly as she glanced at the man, but she quickly recovered. Well, don't let me interrupt. I'll just leave it here. She placed the bag on the workbench, her fingers lingering on Hank's for a brief moment. See you later, Hank. Drive safe, she called out to the driver before heading back out into the Nevada sun, a subtle sadness shadowing her usual cheer. The poet's dream. Hank was securing the padlock when the driver cleared his throat. You know, he said, fiddling with the cuff of his expensive jacket, I always wanted to be a poet. Hank paused, key halfway turned. The desert wind, laced with the scent of sagebrush, whistled a mournful tune around the eaves of the garage. He hadn't expected that. A poet, huh? Yeah, the driver chuckled, a dry, brittle sound. Used to fill notebooks with verses. Terrible stuff, probably. All teenage angst and unrequited love. He looked out at the darkening landscape, the first stars beginning to prick the vast canvas of the sky. Life took a different turn. The poetry got buried under contracts and board meetings. Hank just listened, the silence punctuated by the distant howl of a coyote. He knew a thing or two about dreams deferred, about the slow erosion of ambition. The driver turned back, and in the dim light filtering from the garage, Hank saw a flicker of something vulnerable in his eyes, a hint of the sadness that lingered beneath the polished surface. Sometimes, he confessed, his voice barely a whisper, I wonder what might have been. He paused, then forced a smile. But hey, at least I can afford to drive a nice car, right? Hank finally clicked the padlock shut. Right, he said softly, understanding more than the driver likely knew. He pocketed the key, the cool metal a small comfort in the growing chill. The desert held its secrets close, and so, it seemed, did they both. The unveiling. The engine coughed once, then roared to life, a throaty growl that echoed in the cavernous garage. The Aston Martin vibrated, eager to be unleashed. Hank, satisfied, wiped his hands on a rag, the grease a familiar comfort. That should do it, he said, already turning to tidy his tools. Much appreciated, friend, the driver said, a hint of that familiar London accent cutting through the din. He reached into his back pocket for his wallet, then hesitated, his other hand moving to the baseball cap. He tugged it off, revealing the close-cropped hair and the unmistakable chiseled features. Jason Statham. Hank didn't gawk. He didn't fumble for an autograph. He simply stared, his eyes narrowed, not at the celebrity, but at the man he'd just spent the last hour talking to. The easy camaraderie, the shared stories of loss and regret. It all seemed surreal now, tainted by the veneer of fame. The contrast was jarring, like a photograph suddenly coming into sharp focus. Statham caught his gaze. So, he said, a wry smile playing on his lips. What do I owe you? Hank blinked, the smell of oil and gasoline suddenly heavy in the air. The rain outside had stopped, leaving a glistening sheen on the dusty road. Just the parts, he mumbled, still trying to reconcile the man with the image. Simple honesty. The metallic clang of the roll-up door echoed as Hank wrestled it shut, the last rays of the setting sun painting the dust motes dancing in the air. He wiped his hands on a rag, the scent of oil and gasoline a familiar comfort. Statham, lingering by the workbench, cleared his throat. So, Mr. Elderwood, what do I owe you? Name your price. Consider it a small token of my gratitude for saving me from being stranded. He peeled off a thick wad of bills, easily a couple thousand, and laid it on the scarred wood. Hank stared at the money like it was a rattlesnake coiled to strike. He didn't touch it. That's a more than generous son. A new hoe's hour's labor, call it 50. Statham's eyebrows shot up, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his otherwise impassive face. 50? Mr. Elderwood, I insist. You probably saved me a fortune in towing and hotel costs alone. He gestured to the money, a subtle challenge in his eyes. Hank shook his head, a stubborn set to his jaw. I charged you for the parts and the work. That's all I'm taking. More ain't honest. He picked up a single 50 from the pile, the crisp paper a stark contrast to his calloused hands. He slid the rest back toward Statham. Keep it. Buy yourself something nice. Statham chuckled softly, a sound that rumbled in his chest. He gathered the remaining bills, a strange mixture of amusement and respect in his gaze. Simple honesty, he murmured, more to himself than to Hank. That's a rare commodity these days, Mr. Elderwood. A very rare commodity indeed. He tucked the money away, a thoughtful expression replacing his initial surprise. The leather-bound gift. The Aston Martin thrummed to life, its purr escalating into a menacing growl that resonated within the garage's concrete shell. Statham, wiping his hands on a shop rag, wore that same damned, knowing smile. Instead of immediate departure, he detoured to Hank's workbench, depositing a weighty object there, a book. Its binding, time-worn and dark, was cracked parchment. Bleached of any title, the spine was a blank slate. Its corners were softened by time, the pages within, thick parchment, yellowed with age. It had the aura of an unearthed artifact, something rescued from a long-forgotten trunk. Statham tapped it once, a deliberate punctuation. Read it, he instructed, his voice a low rasp that cut through the diminishing engine reverberations. It holds the key. Hank's brow furrowed, a crease of bewilderment etching itself upon his face. The key to what? Statham simply exhaled a short, dry laugh. Everything. He pivoted and slid behind the wheel, the Aston's chassis vibrating with barely leashed ferocity. A final mocking nod. Then, tires screaming in protest on the slick floor, he backed out and surged away, swallowed by the sudden downpour that blurred the already indistinct desert horizon. Hank remained rooted to the spot, the mingled scents of gasoline and rain heavy in the air, his gaze locked on the book. He had not stirred. The key? What cryptic purpose did Statham intend? A cold dread began to coil in his gut. He reached out, his rough fingertips tracing the contours of the aged cover, a shiver of premonition crawling up his spine. This was no mere token of gratitude. It was a message. And somehow Hank sensed a message delivered for his eyes alone. Repairs of the heart. Hank picked up the book. It was heavier than it looked, bound in worn leather the color of dried blood. The title, embossed in faded gold lettering, read Echoes in the Dust, by a name Hank vaguely recognized, Elias Thorne, the poet Statham had mentioned with such reverence. He ran a callous thumb over the cracked spine, a network of tiny wrinkles mirroring the lines on his own hand. He flipped it open, the aged paper emitting a faint, musty scent like forgotten memories. On the flyleaf, penned in elegant cursive, was an inscription, "To Hank, a fellow traveler on this dusty road. May these echoes resonate. J.S." Hank reread it, the words sinking in like water into parched earth. It wasn't an autograph, not a celebrity trinket. It was a message, a shared acknowledgement of something deeper than a broken hose and a replaced part. Statham hadn't just been being polite. He'd been reaching out. He walked to the open bay door, the desert air cool against his skin. The rain had stopped, leaving the landscape shimmering with a fragile, ethereal light. Puddles reflected the bruised sky, mirroring the turmoil in his own chest. The wind whispered through the junkyard, carrying the scent of creosote and wet metal. He looked down at the book in his hands, then back at the vast emptiness. A strange kinship bloomed in his chest, a quiet understanding. Even someone like Jason Statham, a world away from his dusty garage, felt the echoes of the same dust.